All right. Well, let me just get started here.
Yeah.
You know, since it's the 10-year anniversary of Reservoir Dogs, one of the great films, certainly one of the greatest film debuts of a director, I want to set some records straight. Did you get involved in Dogs through knowing Harvey, or is it because you knew of Quentin's writing already?
Well, I did Thelma and Louise with Harvey, and me and Harvey had scenes in Thelma and Louise that were cut out of the movie, and for plot reasons. I had scenes with him in a police station that they cut out of the movie. So, you know, both of us we had a good time on Thelma, and we did some pretty good scenes, I thought. We made up some stuff, and it didn't make it in the picture, and that was kind of, you know, that was kind of a drag that wasn't in the final movie. So then I got this script. I got Reservoir Dogs from my agent, and you know, I read it, and obviously I knew that it was not like anything I had ever read before, and I asked them who's involved in this thing, and they said Harvey Keitel is playing Mr. White.
So he was already helping out.
So I figured, oh shit, you know, I want to work with Harvey. Well, that's why I wanted to play Mr. Pink, because Mr. Pink had a lot of scenes with Harvey, had a lot of dialogue, you know. And I actually campaigned for Mr. Pink. I tried to convince Quentin to cast me as Mr. Pink, but he didn't want to do that. He was stuck on Steve Buscemi, so he wanted me to be Mr. Blonde.
Would you have played it sort of as Weasley as Buscemi, or you think you had a different idea?
Oh, I think I would have done it a little bit differently. You know, I think, you know, the thing is that once an actor plays a part, it's kind of like Frank Sinatra when he sings a fucking song. It becomes that guy forever, and you can't really imagine anybody doing it any different.
Exactly.
You know? It's kind of funny when you hear Frank try to sing Moon River, because he can't, because that song belongs to Andy Williams. But nobody can sing New York, New York or My Way, because that song belongs to Frank.
As good as Elvis's My Way was, it's different.
It ain't Frank.
Yeah.
You know? But then nobody's going to sing Love Me Tender, because that belongs to Elvis.
Right. Now, what about Mr. Orange? That would have been good, because, you know...
Yeah, Mr. Orange was a good part, but it wasn't the one that jumped off the page for me. It really wasn't what I don't remember having any attraction to play Mr. Orange.
Because you would look like a bad guy, but if you were actually a cop, that would have been kind of cool.
It would have been an interesting choice. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. That's kind of an interesting...
Because after Reservoir Dogs and people wanting to play you as a bad guy or psycho, if you had played Mr. Orange, that would have been the kind of role you would have been looking for later. You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
You look like a bad guy, but you're actually a good guy, but you have this bond with Harvey, and it would have been a whole interesting dynamic there.
I'm looking for good guy roles lately. I always wanted to be the guy that rides off into the sunset, but unfortunately I've only got to do that once or twice. Downwardly thought of for playing all these fucking psychopaths.
But in the end, Mr. Blonde got one of the longest scenes in the movie, right, with the musical torture scene.
Well, over time, Reservoir Dogs became about the ear scene.
Yeah.
And which is ironic, considering that I didn't even want that part. But
do you think you didn't see the potential in that part?
it seemed kind of brutal, and I had done a film called Kill Me Again, and there's a scene in Kill Me with Val Kilmer, and there's a scene in that picture where I have a guy tied up in a chair, and I'm hitting him with a baseball bat, and then I cut his throat, and the chair falls over backwards in slow motion, and I kind of thought that the scene with the cop seemed to me like it was kind of like that, and so for me, I really didn't want to do it. I felt like I was repeating myself. Obviously, you know, Quentin's version of that is far superior in its visual intent, but I just didn't, you know, I was trying to, I'm kind of stuck in the 50s, and I've always imagined myself doing more of some of the roles like Robert Mitchum did, but there doesn't really seem to be very many people who are writing stuff like that.
But you got to go toe-to-toe with Harvey.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like Pink did.
Yeah, we had a...
And the thing is, I've got to tell you, when I first saw it, I knew your work already. But you stood toe-to-toe with Harvey, though.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That was cool.
Yeah, he was... Harvey's a good man, and he's he gives you a lot to work with, you know. He's Harvey's the real deal. I mean, he's what you see is what you get with him. There's not too many guys I've known like that. I think that Al Pacino and Robert Duvall and Harvey are really the only three guys I can say that really are what you get. You know what I'm saying? Nick Nolte's pretty. Nick's up there with that group in a different way. But Harvey's what you see is what you get. You got to deal with Harvey. You know what I'm saying? When you're in a scene with him, you can't not be in the scene. You've got to deal with him in that environment, and he brings that out in you. And I love that shit, man.
Even if you're playing the scene and playing the guy and playing the situation, you can tell if you're maybe a little bit intimidated or whatever. Yeah. You weren't though, man. You were right there saying, "Are you gonna bark all day, little doggy?"
I had to play the role, man. It's Mr. Blonde, you know. I had to do it justice. I had to bring the reality of what Quentin wrote to the screen.
But again,
you know,
in the end, you were such an important part of that film, as everybody else was. But without you doing what you did,
if you take Mr. Blonde out of Reservoir Dogs, what do you got?
No, you got to do the dance scene. You a good dancer?
No, I'm a lousy dancer. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to play Mr. Blonde, because I can't dance. You know, I have no rhythm. I'm not. I remember when I read the script and it said, Mr. Blonde maniacally dances around the manacled cop, you know. And I remember in rehearsals, I said to Quentin, I said, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be Mick Jagger? I said, what am I going to do? And even in the rehearsals, I didn't know what to do. And when we got to that point of that scene in rehearsals, I just said, Quentin, I don't know what to do. And he would say, well, let's wait till we shoot it. And we didn't actually do that until the day we shot the fucking scene. It never happened until that day, because I didn't know what the hell I was going to do.
How many times do you have to take in the end?
I think we did it 3 times, and they have the alternate versions in the DVD. The alternate takes that aren't in the movie are in the DVD. Well, you have to look at the widescreen version disc. They have options to choose from in the other disc. It says alternate takes, and if you cue that up,
I saw the ear alternate take, but
yeah, there's 2 alternate takes. There's one plays directly into the lens. I played the whole scene all the way through directly into the camera, as if the camera was the police officer. And then I did another one, which is the one where it's, you know, he's sawing the damn thing off the side of the head. And then the one that's in the film. And so, you know.
But again, like you said, you put a stamp to it. That's like the only way to do that. Dance.
I figured it just kind of came out that way. I asked him to give me a transistor, and I put a little remote transistor in my ear, and they gave me a transistor for my ear, and it's a little remote transistor, and so I had it in my ear in that scene. You can't really see it, you know, in the wide shot, because it was in my right ear, and I tried to keep my right side away from the camera, so you wouldn't see it. But I was listening to Steeler's Wheel. I was actually listening to that song while I did the scene, because I wanted to have some rhythm. I wanted to have something to go off of. He had 2 choices for music in that scene. He was going to use Barroom Blitz by the Blasters. And he told me the day we shot the scene, he goes, I don't know if I'm going to get the rights for Stuck in the Middle. And he goes, if I don't get it, we're going to do Barroom Blitz for this scene. And I said, well, you know, can't you just play it for me? And he goes, well, no, because then it'll be in the soundtrack of the movie. And recording sound, so I wore the transistor in my ear, and they played it for me with a little remote control thing.
Wow. Yeah, see, that's why I say I don't know if you could dance, because you shimmied pretty good on that to the rhythm. You became real tight with Harvey and Chris Penn, more so from that movie.
Yeah, that's actually when Harvey and I became friends, and then later I asked him to be godfather to my son Max, and Harvey came to the church, and we did the service and with my little boy, and you know, Harvey held my son, and the guy, it was very funny when we did the service. Harvey and I both had been out the night before, and we were a little rough that morning, and we were standing there with my little guy, and the priest is saying the admonitions, and in Italian he was saying, you know, the things you say when you do the Godfather thing. And there's a point in time when they ask you if you renounce Satan. And he looked at Harvey and I, and he said, do you renounce Satan? And I looked over at Harvey, and he looked over at me, and we both looked back to the guy, and we went. Harvey goes, "Yeah," and I go, "Yeah."
There's Mr. Blonde and a bad lieutenant.
It was a strange moment, man.
Oh,
it was
man.
it was a strange moment. It was very, very funny.
And what about Eddie Bunker? Did he help you guys with the some of the things with the movie?
The cool thing about Eddie Bunker is that he really lived that life.
Yeah, and he wrote books and stuff.
Eddie Bunker's the real deal. I
Yeah.
mean, that fucking guy, man, he did that shit, you know, for real. And so for having him around was pretty good, you know. I went to him quite a few times and asked him. You see, in the movie, you don't see the jewelry robbery. You don't see the robbery in the movie, but we rehearsed the robbery as if it was going to be in the movie. We set it up in the warehouse. We made a fake jewelry store front, and we enacted the robbery.
It's a great idea.
Psychologically, I think Quentin was interested in seeing how the guys would react in that situation without having it scripted. And at that time, I asked Eddie Bunker a lot of questions. You know, Eddie Bunker wrote a book called No Beast So Fierce, and it later became a movie called Straight Time that Dustin Hoffman did. Straight Time is one of my favorite pictures, one of my personally favorite films that I've ever seen. It didn't do very well because the studio fucked it up, and Dustin in fact sued the studio for the way that they released it, and I believe that he won that lawsuit because they screwed it up. But anyway, that was the Eddie Bunker story. And so I asked him a bunch of stuff about, you know, the reality of those kinds of situations. And, you know, here's a guy that lived through that stuff and survived it, and then lived to help people make motion picture.
What about the legend of Lawrence Tierney? Can you share a funny story, one of your episodes with him?
Well, you know, there's a great tribute to him on the DVD, and you know, I told a few stories about Lawrence on the DVD. I think that, you know, he got really aggravated when I had gestures, like if I had scratched my cheek, or if you watch the DVD, there's a moment in the DVD where he looks to his left and he goes, "Stop."
I thought that was to Quentin directing.
No, he was saying that to me. He was saying to me, "Stop," because I went like this, you know, or I'd sit back and I'd go like this, or, you know, I'd just be like, do that, and it made him insane.
Really?
Eventually, we did the scene with Lawrence when he gives everybody their colors, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Blue, Mr. Pink.
Yeah.
None of us were in the fucking room. We all got out of the room because Lawrence was having so much trouble remembering his dialogue, because we were sitting there off camera for him. And you can see in the DVD when he's doing that scene, he's all frustrated and he goes, "Stop." That's because I was just, you know, trying to give the man something to do.
Right.
But he wanted everyone to be like that, you know. So finally we just said, "Fuck it," and we got up and we left. You know, I just said, I got up and I walked the fuck out. And everybody else went on, so Lawrence ended up by himself doing that shot. And then he got it together and he did it. But I think it's an interesting story that nobody was there in the room with him. It's just kind of like on the waterfront when Rod Steiger did his scene with Brando. Brando wasn't even in the car.
Really?
Brando left the stage when Rod did his half of that scene, when he did his single, you know, with the gun and Terry and all that. Marlon wasn't even there.
Jesus. Do you admire male camaraderie? Because you're an old school guy.
Yes,
you know?
I do. I very much so. I think it's an underrated love, and I think I mean, I'm a father. I have these 4 little boys and 1 stepson, and I think that I have a huge responsibility in my life, you know, not only as a provider, but also to give these boys some guidance. And I think that male camaraderie is important, and I think it's I mean, let's face it, it's been going on since the days of the cavemen, and I think it's a complicated thing, though, you know, because men don't readily show emotions and love for each other, and it's the whole father-son thing and all that, you know, with You know, when I grew up, you know, it wasn't popular for fathers to be affectionate to their children, and you know, back to a certain extent, maybe that had to be that way because the generation that came from it had a certain kind of strength about it, and I think that there's a certain strength that can be derived from being deprived of emotion and affection. I think that one can get very. I think a person can get kind of hard shell, and I think some of that shell comes from not getting too much love as a child, and I think that men, I mean, I think
even if you're a loner, you need that one or two.
I can count my best friends on one hand, and I think that, you know, unfortunately, you know, as you get older and you go through life, really close friendships become harder and harder to come by. One of my very, very best friends that I grew up with and was shot on his couch and is dead. You know, another really good friend of mine that, you know, just recently died of some terrible illness, and another guy that I grew up with in school, he became a fireman, he was killed in a fire. And so I wrote about that in my book, in Burning in Paradise. But it's a very complicated issue. But I've had a lot of my very close friends have come to a bad end, and I find it very hard to get close to people, and I find it very hard to make friends that are long-lasting friendships.
When I interviewed Dennis, he was saying, "What a writer, man! Tarantino, True Romance," and he was talking about that day he had with Christopher Walken, and he says they were just cooking, you know, they were just going at it, back and forth. And I asked how much they contributed, improvise or whatever, and he said he brought in the eggplant thing. But did you in Dogs? Did you guys contribute at all? Because I'd imagine it's a fairly tight script.
Well, Quentin's dialogue is so incredibly fresh that you don't want to go off the script. You know what I mean? Because it's so fucking good the way it is. You want to go with it because of the writer that he is. But there's always things that people do off the script, and there's always things that people improv. You know, Talking Into the Year was not in the script, but I only did that. No, that wasn't in there either.
That was a nice touch, though.
But it was only because
touch.
It's the energy of the moment. You know, if you're standing there with an ear in your hand, what are you gonna do? You know what I mean? And I'm standing there with this fucking thing in my hand. I'm thinking, what am I gonna do? And it just naturally occurred to me to speak to it. And Quentin was off screen, and he was going, toss it, toss the ear, toss it, you know? Because he could see that I didn't know what the fuck to do with the ear. You know, he's very intuitive that way. Yeah. So after I got done with the little joke, I flipped it, you know? And I think that...
it was funny. Everybody laughed. I went to see it the first day.
Things like that happen on the spur of the moment. I think it's just a spontaneous kind of thing. I went off the script a few times, and I did things that I guess everybody did to a certain extent in little ways. Everybody did their own little thing. I think that's the magic of casting. You know, you have to cast actors who are going to bring.
You couldn't imagine anybody else in that.
Nah, it wouldn't really work
in that group. Talk a little bit about what you think is important about the male friendships. Mr. Blonde, as psycho as he was fiercely loyal to Joe and Nice Guy Eddie, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Just like Harvey was to Tim Roth.
Oh God, yeah.
Honor among thieves.
That's a big theme of Reservoir Dogs, is the honor among thieves, and the mistakes that one can make when they're in that kind of brotherhood. And there's a bond there that can go one way or the other, and I think that was a big theme of that movie. It's about betrayal, and it's about understanding. And I'm saying that no matter what Mr. Blonde ever did, when Nice Guy Eddie starts telling Harvey and Mr. Orange about Mr. Blonde and what he did for the family, at that moment he becomes redeemed for anything that he did. And that's because of the way society looks at it, and the way that that sort of bonding is looked up to. That's why the Hells Angels are so respected, because they have this bond and this thing that everybody knows about. And it's highly respected, you know, because in fact it's the force that keeps the American spirit alive, and the human spirit. It keeps people, you know, looking out for each other, man, is an important fucking thing, you know.
Did you approach Mr. Blonde as Psycho? This is an interesting acting question because psychos don't wake up saying, "Oh, I'm going to be more psycho today." You know what I mean? How did you approach that?
I didn't.
You know, even Donnie Brasco.
I looked at it as being. I figure it this way. If you're going to play a role, you're not really going to be able to get too far away from yourself. In fact, it's only an aspect of yourself that you're portraying. The best thing to do is to put yourself in the skin of the character and ask yourself, what would I do if I was this guy? And as far as that goes, if you want to talk about waking up in the morning, that's exactly what happens. You wake up in the morning and you say to yourself, does Mr. Blonde think that he's crazy? And the fact is, no, he didn't at all. He considered himself to be sane, and everything that he was doing was very rational and made sense within the realm of his world. And I don't think you can play somebody like that and think that they're nuts, because it doesn't work that way.
Then you were loyal to the guys that was helping you out.
Yeah, man, you know, I came to Joe and I begged him for a job. I needed to get back in the scheme of things, and
he took care of you in the hole.
He took care of me when I was locked up, and I felt like I was grateful for that. But at the same time, I knew that I could have ratted him out, and I didn't. And so I figured, you know, they gave me a job and put me back to work, and so there's a little bit of loyalty. And it's also an acting thing, because I read a book that James Cagney wrote, and he said that if you ever play a really bad guy, you got to look for something noble in that guy. And if you ever play someone really noble, you have to look for something dark in that guy.
Now, you're probably not surprised, at least, that Reservoir Dogs has stood the test of time. It's become an American classic, really. Can you tell me about the first time you actually saw the film, how it turned out? You guys knew it was stuff, it was really popping while you're doing it. But when you saw the finished product, how did you feel?
Reservoir Dogs gained a lot of steam over time. It really wasn't the phenomenon that it is now when it first came out.
But I thought it was absolutely brilliant when I first saw it, though. First day down in Angelica Theater.
Well, you're a wise man, and you know, I think that for the most part, you know, when Reservoir Dogs was premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, which is where I first saw it, you know, Harvey Weinstein came to me and told me I was going to get nominated for a Best Supporting Actor. And
today you would, if that movie came out.
Well, you know, I think that politically they decided to get behind the crying game, and so Reservoir Dogs kind of got lost out of that kind of thing, the award thing, and so it kind of got buried for a little while. And it really wasn't until Pulp Fiction came out that Reservoir Dogs was rediscovered, and then it started to be this thing that people started talking about and being aware of. Before that, it was an underground, independent film that was made by a young director that everybody liked, but it wasn't really going to go anywhere. Then it just kind of, like I said, over time it got this reputation, and over time it gained all this steam, and over time it suddenly turned into this other thing, you know, that it is now. And it was kind of, you know, it was I mean, I knew that it was a disturbing picture. I definitely knew that it was a disturbing film, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And I was happy that I had done the film, and I knew it was different from anything else that I'd ever seen. But I was a little naive back in those days as to, you know, what these things mean and their long-lasting effect on people.
But I mean, this guy, Tarantino, I mean, he had all the moves, didn't he? I mean, he had the opening, the conflict, the ending, non-linear. Of course, the dialogue was popping from his first movie, the look, the humor, everything.
Yeah,
the music, the friendships, the betrayal, revenge, everything you talked about.
It's ironic, and it's also what's really amazing to me is how many copycats there have been of Reservoir Dogs.
Still, there's a Japanese movie just like it. You know,
it still goes on and on, man. You see it in television commercials. You see it in any movie that anyone makes now about bad guys. They always, you can tell when someone is trying to tap in on the dogs thing, and you know. I mean, I've even had guys who have tried to, you know, if I'm in a film, you know, ask me to, you know, wear the black and white suit. And I can't do that, you know what I mean? It's, you know, I'm going to do it in Kill Bill because that's Quentin, baby, you know?
You'd read Tarantino's other scripts before, right? True Romance?
I read True Romance when we were making Reservoir Dog. And I actually had Natural Born Killers when we were making Reservoir Dogs, and I took it all over the place and tried to get people to make it, and nobody wanted to make that fucking thing. I couldn't get Natural Born Killers made. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it, you know, which is really sad and crazy when you think about it. So, look how they all went for it after, you know, Quentin became successful.
When you were making Dogs, though, as brilliant as that script was and the other scripts you've read of his, was there any doubt that in your mind at any point in the shooting that this guy will be able to pull it off as a first-time director, as brilliantly as he did?
No, I never had that feeling at all. In fact, when him and Lawrence Tierney had that big fight in the Pancake House, and Quentin fired him, he said, "You were fucking fired. Get the fuck off of this set." I was like, man, this guy is totally in charge of his own destiny, you know? I mean, I was very proud of him. I mean, I never had any feeling like that at all. I always thought, the one thing I like about Quentin is he's methodical in that he knows exactly what he wants to do. He knows exactly how he's going to get it. And now doing Kill Bill with him, the process that I'm going through with him right now on Kill Bill is exactly what he was doing in Dogs. He knows what works for him, man. He's got a recipe.
And it ended up being one of the greatest director debuts ever.
Well, I think Kill Bill is most likely going to be, I think Kill Bill is going to be, you can remember when I say this, and it'll be read that I've said, Kill Bill is going to break every stereotypical idea of every picture that's ever been made about this particular subject, and it's going to place Quentin up in a place that very few directors in history have ever even come close to.
You like his acting?
I think that he's a gifted actor, but I think that
He tried Broadway and all that kind of stuff too.
I never saw him on Broadway. I didn't see any of that. I think I've seen him play so many different roles. I liked him in Dusk Till Dawn. I thought he was really cool. I love that scene that he has in the back of the truck in Dusk Till Dawn, where he's talking to the girl in the back of the what is it, a camper or a trailer?
Yeah. Juliet Lewis.
Yeah, he's pretty good in that scene with Juliet. That's
I liked him in Pulp Fiction.
Best scene I've ever seen him do.
I liked him in Pulp Fiction because when you see him in interviews, you know, he has interesting delivery and he's very passionate about what he, and in the Pulp Fiction scene with Harvey and Travolta and Sam Jackson, that Tarantino came out, you know, the way he...
Yeah, he's good, and he's going to be in Kill Bill too. He likes to be in his stuff, you know, and he's a little bit more, he's got a little bit more to give than Hitchcock did. You know, Hitchcock just kind of walked in and out. Quentin does dialogue. I wrote a poem about Quentin. It's in my new book, and Quentin also wrote the foreword for my new book. And I talk about his acting.
The Bloodhounds.
In the book.
When did you decide to start putting your foot down and, you know, challenging your potential employers, the directors? I suppose with Tarantino, he's campaigning for Mr. Pink, but more so with Ridley Scott saying, look, I don't want to play the rapist, but you may not get the job at all, you know what I mean? And saying, look, I want to play the sensitive boyfriend.
Well, you know, I mean, it's a calculated risk. You know, I mean...
But at that point, did you feel like, look, fuck it, I'm going to have to put my foot down and...
Well, I mean, you got to live with yourself. And, you know, at the end of the day, you got to live with these choices because it's going to be on film and it's there forever. And I've done a lot of movies that I never should have done and I regret doing. I never should have done Wyatt Earp. And I never should have made Species 2, you know, because they're both trash. And it was a waste of my time. And I learned my lesson the hard way about making bad movies. I also made a lot of bad B movies that went straight to video that I never should have done. But in the case of somebody like Ridley Scott, you know, a guy like that comes to you to make a picture, you would rather not be involved in it unless you're going to be in a good role. And it would have done absolutely nothing for me to be the rapist in the parking lot. Everyone would have expected me to do that. I wanted to play Jimmy from the first time I read it, and I had to go back and see Ridley 3 times before I finally got the part of Jimmy. In fact, I even had to take Susan out to lunch. But, you know, thank God it worked out because it's one of the few times that I've ever been able to be on screen as a sensitive guy. I think I pulled it off, and I thought it was a good, you know, it has shelf life.
And again, what you said about taking that calculated risk is the same thing as same thing in Donnie Brasco, right?
Yeah,
like he didn't want to audition. No. I'll meet with you guys, but
you know, I figured that if I met everybody, I wouldn't get the job. I'm not a good meter. I'm not a good auditioner. I'm a terrible cold reader. I'm horrible at that. I just can't get it. I don't come off in a room. I just can't do it. And I knew that they were interested in me for Donnie Brasco. And I said, you know what, you guys, you know and I know that I can play Sonny Black. So why don't we just get on with it? You know? And they said, no, it doesn't work that way, and blah, 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 blah. And I got to do this and I got to do that. And I said, no. Because if I go do that, I ain't going to get the job. So I'm not going to do it, and I'll leave it up to a higher power. And if at the end of the day you decide that I'm the guy, then so be it. And then finally what happened was they said, all right, you don't have to read, but Al wants to meet you, okay? I said, you know, what am I going to say? I will meet Al. Absolutely, I'd love to meet Al. But for me, it was more of an actor. I'd like to meet another actor. And I didn't really decide in my mind that it had anything to do with whether or not I got the part of Donnie Brasco. And I went up to his apartment and I met Al, and we talked, sat around and talked for a while. And we talked about everything but Donnie Brasco. The only thing I talked to him about the movie was I wanted to make sure that they left in the fact that Sonny Black had pigeons on the roof. He had pigeon coops and he kept pigeons. And I thought it was a wonderful part of Sonny's personality. And I was really, it bothered me that it wasn't in the screenplay. And I asked Al if he would help me talk to the director and talk to the screenwriter and try to get Sonny's birds in the fucking movie. And he agreed with me that he thought it should be in there. Of course it isn't. It didn't work out that way. But that's what I remember talking to him about. A couple days after that, I got the part.
Now that people love your work, you have a lot of fans in the business who want to work with you eventually and so forth. But even recently, though, with Lee Tamahori, who you've worked with in Mulholland Falls.
Yeah.
Again, you put your foot down and say, look, you know, I'll play this character, but I don't want my fucking character to die the way he does.
It's a waste of time, you know. It's just kind of like...
It ended up being a real nice role, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, it ended up being something good. I mean, I knew that Lee was going to direct the picture. Pierce is a good pal of mine. You know, I called him up and I asked Pierce, I said, is there anything in the Bond film for me? He said, yeah, there's a couple roles. And I called up Lee and I said, is there anything in there for me? I'd like to do something in a Bond picture. You know, Jesus Christ, it's James Bond, let's face it, you know? How cool is that? I want to do something in a Bond film. So Lee says to me, there's nothing in there for you, Mike. He said, there's one guy, there's a CIA guy, and he gets killed from a giant ray in space. And he's describing to me how I would have to do this death scene in front of a blue screen. And I said, oh God, no. You know, I would rather not be in, no, you know. I don't want to have to explain to my sons why, you know, the ray from space, you know, gets me in the Bond movie. So that was the end of it. And I wasn't going to be in the picture. And then about 3 weeks later, I called up, I started relentlessly calling Lee Tamahori on his cell phone and asking him to call me back because I heard that there was another part in the movie. And finally, you know, I said, listen, man, it'd be better for me if I could do this other guy. And eventually that's what happened. And I went to London and I met Barbara and Michael Wilson, and they had this other part, which is a recurring role. So I come back in another Bond, and like maybe 2 more.
Cool.
And I'm the head of the NSA. I'm like a military guy. I'm originally skeptical about James Bond, and then it turns out that I'm cool and I'm you know, on the side of good.
And you're the guy who sends you're Halle Berry's boss, right?
Yeah. I'm like sends her out the same way Judi Dench sends out Pierce. You know, that
cool.
kind of.
Kill Bill, you didn't push for the David Carradine part?
No, it was never even a consideration. Quentin and I had we renewed our friendship. We started getting in touch with each other because we had been out of touch for years.
Just because you guys are busy?
Just because we were doing other things. And we started hanging out together. I started going over to his house. I got a 57 Chevy that I didn't have any place to put it, and he let me keep it in his garage. So I used to go up there and fuck around with the car, and it was in his garage. But I would go over there and work on my car. And he has a great screening room in his house. And he has people over and he screens movies. And so we started hanging out and being in touch. We also both collect old movie posters. And we gave each other old movie posters, you know. It's male camaraderie, like you were saying.
Right.
But it's the real thing. And he told me that he was writing this thing called Kill Bill, and did I want to read it? And there was a role in there that he was asked me to do of a character named Mr. Barrel. And it was a very small role, and I would have had to learn how to speak Japanese, and it shot for only one day. There was one scene in the film, and naturally I was happy to do it and wanted to do it. And then about 2 weeks later, I was up at Quentin's house, and we were sitting around talking, and he asked me if I wanted to read some scenes of a character called Bud, and with 2 D's. And I said, well, yeah. So we sat outside by his pool, and we read some scenes of Bud. And obviously it was a much bigger role than Mr. Barrel, and it was obviously much more there to do. It's actually Bill's little brother. At that point in time, though, Warren Beatty was going to be Bill. And I went to a dinner party that someone had for Harvey and his wife, Harvey Keitel. Harvey and his wife were having...
I didn't know he was married.
Yeah, he just recently got married. And there's a woman named Wendy Stark, and she had a dinner party for Harvey and his wife. And at that dinner party, I met Warren Beatty. And Warren and I talked a little bit about Kill Bill. And I kind of thought that we were going to be really cool together. I thought we would have been an interesting combination. And, you know, I had read these scenes with Quentin for Bud, who was Bill's little brother. And then I met Warren, and I talked to Quentin about meeting Warren. And Lawrence Tierney was also at that dinner party. And that's the way it was going to be. And then it turned out that Warren and Quentin could not get along with each other for one reason or another. And David Carradine became Bill. And so that's kind of like the chronological order of how I became Bud and Kill Bill.
Okay. Natural Born Killers. I'd read that you turned down Mickey out of loyalty to Tarantino. And recently I read that Oliver Stone wanted you, but the studios...
Well, it's really a combination of both those things. Quentin asked me not to do the picture. He said that Stone ruined it and didn't want me to do it. And he didn't think that I should do it. I agreed with him,
But you already knew Stone from Doors, though, too.
I knew Oliver from the Doors, but I did not have a good experience with Oliver on the Doors. I didn't like the guy very much, and I don't think that he liked me. He kind of busted my, I think I was blowing Val Kilmer off the screen, and I think that Oliver didn't like that. So he tried to mind fuck me in some of the scenes so that, to help Val with the Morrison thing. And I don't like those kinds of tactics from a director. I don't need that kind of shit, But I figured if this guy come to me with Natural Born Killers, obviously he realized that I could make that picture work. And I was ego-minded enough at that point in my life that I wanted to bang that out for Oliver. I was gonna blow that fucking thing wide open for Oliver Stone. But then, when Quentin came to me and told me that Oliver ruined the picture, I began to be very doubtful of wanting to do it. And at the same time, Oliver called me at my home and he said, "You're going to hear that I'm seeing other actors, but don't take it serious, it's not true." And I said, "Okay, fine." And he goes, "There's a certain amount of studio politics I have to deal with, but don't worry about it, because at the end of the day, Mike, it's you and me against the suits." And I said, "Okay, that's cool." And so I'm taking this word from a guy who's made films about people who stand up for what they believe in. So I never imagined that he would stab me in the fucking back with a machete, which is basically what he did. Because about a week later, he called me up and said that he was going to get twice as much money from Warner Brothers to make the film with Woody Harrelson than he could get for making it with me. And I said, "Okay, Oliver, so be it. At least you told me the truth, Oliver, But that's what happened. He went off and made that movie with Woody because he got more money to do it with Woody.
Did you like the movie?
No.
He's an intimidating guy, isn't he?
Who?
Stone.
You know what the thing
I
about
read
Oliver
for him
is?
for that film.
You know what the thing about Oliver is he tries to be intimidating, but in reality, he's a pussy. He's a big fucking pussy. If you get back in his face and you say, you know what, man, fuck you, he doesn't do anything. You know? I mean, listen, I know the guy has a war record, and I know that he was brave, and I know he did his time in Vietnam, and for that, God bless his soul. And he's made some truly memorable films. God bless him for that, too. But in reality, on a one-to-one basis with Oliver, I think he's kind of a backstabber. You want to take a break for 1 minute?
I mean, you don't want me to put that Oliver Stone stuff up. I'm calling him a pussy, no idea.
I don't care, man.
All right,
I don't care.
Cool.
Fuck him. Fuck that motherfucker.
All right, cool. You wanted to play Clarence too, right? In True Romance, which you would have been great.
I would have liked to have done that very much, but...
What a great fucking part.
Yeah.
But you could have played Tom Sizemore's part in Natural Born Killers too, could you?
Yeah, I probably could have, but, you know, like I say, Oliver's a pussy.
All right. You weren't up for Clarence at all?
No.
Looking back, how much do you regret turning down Vince Vega in Pulp Fiction? I mean,
Well,
in favor of Wyatt Earp.
I mean, here's the deal with that. You know, I got that script, and I was in New York City. The Getaway had just come out in the theaters, and I was in New York doing the David Letterman show for The Getaway, and I got Pulp Fiction. They sent it to my hotel. I was at the Regency Hotel in Manhattan, and I sat there and I read it, and I kind of felt like it was Reservoir Dogs. I thought it was a gangster, it was a bad guy in the thing. I thought it was brilliantly written, and I recognized that it was well written. But at that time, having had Reservoir Dogs, having The Getaway in the movie theaters, I wanted to try a different role. I wanted to try something else, and I was worried that I was being typecast as a heavy. And Larry Kasdan, at that same time, asked me if I wanted to be in Wyatt Earp. So I said yeah, but I wanted to play Doc Holliday in Wyatt Earp. So I had this idea in my mind. Dennis Quaid did Doc Holliday. I had seen Kirk Douglas as Doc Holliday in Gunfight at the OK Corral. God damn it, I was going to play Doc fucking Holliday, man. And I figured I could convince Larry that could work. So those discussions started. Meanwhile, I had a very bad agent who wasn't telling me or giving me the right advice about anything. And I figured that maybe I could do both pictures. Maybe I could do Wyatt and I could do Pulp Fiction if they could work out the dates. Mm-hmm. So then, eventually, they said that the dates would work out. That I could go do Pulp and then I could do Wyatt. So then I find out that Larry Kasdan tells me that he's got Dennis Quaid as Doc Holliday, and he wanted me to play Virgil, who's Wyatt's brother. So then I figured, well, I'm gonna get to walk down the street to the OK Corral as a cowboy. And this is something that happened in history. Mm-hmm. This really happened. This is historically true. And who in the fuck is gonna expect me to show up as a cowboy after the parts that I've been doing, you know?
And you love Westerns too.
Yeah, and I said, holy fuck, man, I have to do this. I'm gonna do this. So then I left it up to my people, and I figured that I could do both movies, right? Mm-hmm. So what happened was, I signed up for Wyatt Earp, and they were still negotiating with the schedule for me to go do Pulp. And then Larry Kasdan told my agent that he would not let me out of the rehearsal of Wyatt Earp. They wanted me for like 3 fucking weeks of rehearsal in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which I later moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and lived there for about a year, right after I got divorced from my second wife. And anyway, Larry wouldn't let me out of rehearsal. And so they said basically, listen, you know, Larry, you know, if he doesn't want to do the rehearsal, he's not going to be in the movie. So I had a choice there. It was like, holy fuck, what am I going to do, man?
So with Tarantino, it was okay that you do both?
Yeah, no, sure. Shit. You know, they were right there with me, no problem. So Larry really fucked me with that. And, you know, looking back on it now, I realized that, you know, if Wyatt Earp had been a successful film,
Well, it was supposed to be one of the Oscar contender type films.
if Wyatt Earp had been what it was sold to me as being, and if they had given my fucking character a little bit of camera time, and if they had respected me at all as an actor and given me 5 fucking minutes of what I thought should have been done with Virgil, and if Wyatt would have been a big successful picture, everyone would have said that I was a genius because I turned down Pulp Fiction to do a Western. And I probably would have got, you know, let's just say, things would have been perceived much differently had Wyatt been a very successful film. The only reason I'm asked the question about Pulp Fiction is because Wyatt was a fucking, was a dud. It tanked.
Plus there's another one going on too.
And so people went, oh God, you know, how does that feel? Well, Jesus, it doesn't feel good. You know, it doesn't feel very good. But in hindsight, all I can say is everyone's smarter in hindsight. Everyone's always very intelligent looking back. But at the time, I was looking for a different kind of a role, a different kind of character.
So you can't really regret it, can you?
I don't regret it because the thing of it is that if things play out the way that I'm imagining that they will, had I done Pulp Fiction, I would have played my own brother because Vincent Vega and Vic Vega are brothers. If I'd have done Pulp, there would be no Vega brothers. If I'd have done Pulp, I might not be doing Kill Bill right now. So I think that everything, for whatever reason, has a reason for happening, and maybe as much as that hurt, I think that now, obviously, there are things going on and things happening because of that. So. You know, everything has a strange way of coming back around. Because if I do the Vega Brothers someday with John Travolta, that's going to be pretty cool, and that's going to be really fun.
Whether it's a prequel or even a sequel, like you're talking on DVD, if you had lived.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Vic Vega can wake up in the emergency room. You know.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, that's the
bulletproof motherfucker.
Yeah, that's easy. That's a movie. Or it can be a prequel if John loses weight.
Right. We talk a little bit about the awards thing, because a couple of times you could have been nominated. Are awards and stuff important to you? Or was it purely business?
Oh, I've never got anything. I mean, I've never gotten an award for anything. I've never gotten anything for anything that I've ever done. And I think there's, I'm not sure exactly what it is, what there is to that, but I think that it can be. I'd like to have access to more projects, and I'd like to be able to get involved in some other things. And I think that the awards help with that ability. And, you know, it's all fine and cool to say, I don't care about awards, and, you know, it's an egotistical experience that, you know, one can try to sound macho when you say you don't care. But I think that's a big lie, you know. I think everybody likes to be acknowledged to a certain extent.
Harvey said that important to him because it's important for young people to look up to and aspire to something.
I think that some of it is a little misguided, and I think that some of it is a little preposterous. Some of these shows like American Idol and shit like that, I think that they're kicking that stuff down the throats of the American public, and I don't really think it's very responsible. But I think that, I mean, look at, man, Henry Fonda was on his deathbed when he got an Academy Award. And why is that? Can anyone explain that to me? Look at the pictures that guy made. You know, what's his name? Gary Cooper, for God's sakes. You know, I just think that it's a hard call. I mean, I don't understand that whole voting process and how it really works. I don't know how all that stuff gets figured out.
Have you regretted taking roles for money?
Yeah. But only because, well, I think the thing of it is that, you know, when you're outside of someone's life and you don't know why they do the things they do, it's easy to perceive them as being a mistake. But when you're a guy who has 5 children and a guy who's been divorced twice, there's an awful lot of overhead involved. I got a big fucking nut to crack every month. And nobody's happy when Papa's not making money. And, you know, when I got to put food on the table, and my people that represent me aren't getting the job done. And if someone comes to me with a job, and they're willing to pay me to do that job, you know, I'm no different than a fucking bricklayer. You know, and I may have built a couple of crooked buildings for sure, but in the process of it, I fed my fucking family, and I took care of the people that I love. So, you know, that's the flip side of it.
So again, you can't really regret the choices you've made in that. For that,
My regret lies in the people that made the pictures that seduced me into thinking that we were making something interesting, because ultimately it's the production values and it's the presentation of the movie that falls flat. And you try to do favors for somebody, or you put your trust into somebody thinking that you can fix it or make a good picture, and then you realize that it's going to be garbage. And you know, that's regrettable, you know. I mean, that's but I think that, I mean, even Martin Luther King said the things that don't destroy you make you stronger, so you know.
Well, how important is quality versus, like Reservoir Dogs, you guys didn't make any money, but I imagine you can only take so many of those types of pictures where you're not making money, but
I think,
and do quality.
What's your question again?
If you just want to do quality, you're not going to end up making enough. Down the road, you can get the bigger money pictures because you did the quality works.
I've had a really bizarre career. My career is as eclectic as any career could be. I've had huge box office films. I've had very critically acclaimed low-budget films. I've done mediocre pictures that didn't do anything. I've done super fucking bad B movies that went straight to video. I've done the most horrendous shit that you've ever seen. And I've done some of the best films that are going to be remembered in the history of motion pictures. I've got a strange career. I've had a strange... My fucking career is like a heart monitor. I mean, it's very bizarre. And I think it's
just... But they can't get you down, though.
Yeah, baby. Oh, sure. Of course it can, man. Listen, first of all, being an actor is the most neurotic fucking thing that anyone could decide to do with themselves in the first place. You know, putting yourself in a position where you have to perceive other people's emotions, and then you have to portray emotions, and you got to read other people's emotions in order to play a part. It's fucking nuts to begin with. And I'll be lucky if I don't end up in a fucking padded cell someday, because I don't have any. I don't have acting ability. I'm not a trained actor. You know, I'm trying to live the reality of the moment of a character that I'm playing. I don't have the benefit of a lot of skills to draw upon. So,
which is what makes you what people want too, though.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, it works in both directions, but it's a double-edged sword, and it's also kind of a, you know, you find yourself kind of wondering, why am I doing this? I mean, I towed cars, and I was a fucking plumber, and I painted houses and cut people's grass, and I was an orderly in a hospital, and I
pumped gas.
Yeah, I mean, I pumped gas for 100 years, and I was an auto mechanic at a Chevy dealership, and I mean, I did everything that one can do. But, you know, the acting thing was, you know, something that, you know, was something to aspire to, but I didn't really think that was going to be possible in my life. But all I'm saying is, now that I'm doing it, this is it. I'm stuck with it. Now I got to live with it. Doesn't make it any more easier, though.
Have you ever done, like, therapy, like a lot of the actors do, to get out of character? You know?
No, man. I don't believe in therapy. In fact, I think it's a horrible...
Tony Soprano.
It's a fucking ridiculous, horrific... I think the Soprano thing is funny. And I don't understand why the Sopranos haven't written about 10 episodes for me, because I'd love I'd love to be on the Sopranos. I'd love to do a little character arc on the Sopranos, but unfortunately, you know, they don't call me, and that's, you know, as bizarre to me as anything could be why they haven't asked me. Well, if you talk to David Chase, ask him why in the fuck can he give anyone on the planet a good reason why Michael Madsen hasn't done about it.
You'd be good as one of the New York guys.
I mean, you know, there's only one season of The Sopranos left, for God's sakes. The one that's going on now, and there's one more, and that's going to be it. You know?
Right.
And I think, for God's sakes, they ought to bring me in on the last run of that thing. For God's sake.
Right.
Good Christ. You know? I mean, come on, you know?
Put a little spark in that thing.
I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, listen, there's a lot of guys out there that I should be working with that I'm not. I never made a picture with Scorsese. Explain that to me. Why in the fuck doesn't he call me? What the fuck is wrong with him? He can't call me up and ask me to be in one of his things? What the fuck? What am I, in a circus over here?
Some of these people would think that you'd work with them at some point.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would just figure, right?
Yeah.
But...
And even Sizemore has.
The Tommy did that ambulance thing. But I mean, try to explain that to me. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me. I don't know, man. Like I was saying, my career has been very bizarre. It goes up and down, and I don't know why it's been the way that it is. And it doesn't make any sense to me. As far as therapy is concerned, I think that's all fine and dandy in The Sopranos, but I ain't gonna go lay on anybody's couch and start telling them, what color the ink blot is. I don't want to talk to anybody about my fucking feelings. Who the fuck cares?
Right.
First of all, I want to sit there and whine and cry about my life or something. Some idiot's gonna sit there and take notes and. Listen, man, when I got divorced, man, from my second wife, in order to get custody of my children, I had to do all that fucking shit. And you can put this in there, brother. I had to do all this fucking shit with the court. They take your kids, man, and they take your fucking people, and they put you in this room where you gotta do this therapy thing. It's part of the program, the protocol, the way it's set up, man, in the state of California, man. This is what you gotta do if you want custody of your children. And you sit in the room with these fucking idiots, and they analyze you. People who don't fucking know you, man. They never step foot in my home. They don't know a goddamn thing about me. But in 2 or 3 hours, a couple times a week in their office, they're gonna make a profile of who they think you are and everything that you're about, man. And they put it in a big report. It ends up being like this, this thick report about you, man. Yeah. Just what these stupid questions that they ask you about, what color are these glasses? Are you sure that they're that color? That kind of shit, man. And you're like, what the fuck are you asking me that for? And they come to conclusions about the kind of person you are, about stuff like that. And it's not fair, and it's unbalanced. And the stuff that they come up with, I don't care how many years they studied in college, the shit that they come up with about yourself and your children and your attitude toward life has nothing to do with the reality of who you really are. And this is the kind of shit that gets given to judges, and then the judge determines how much time you can have with your children based on these freaks that make their living on it evaluating people. I'm telling you, man, it's a fucking horror. And it should be taken out of the system. It should be fucking destroyed. Did you read about that woman that jumped off the fucking roof of the courthouse building downtown?
No, I didn't. Because
her kids were going to be taken away from her. She jumped off the fucking roof and killed herself.
Really?
There was a little Spanish boy who shot himself in the fucking head because he couldn't see his father. He missed his dad so much. Are you going to tell me that these people that do this for a living, that they have a right to have that say-so over people's lives and people's things? And it's wrong, it's corrupted, it's insidious. It's just fucking bad, man.
You think the kids ought to be able to choose, or?
No, I don't think that, I think obviously, children's feelings have to be considered, but children, young children don't have the ability to make decisions of that magnitude. But I'm saying that there has to be a better system of realizing these things and figuring this shit out. How can someone tell me whether or not I'm a fit parent if they've never even set foot in my fucking home? This is home, brother. This is where the heart is. This is where life is, Go and look at my fucking son's room and tell me that little boy isn't happy, ask my little boy if he isn't happy or he isn't looked after well. And these motherfuckers are gonna say that, well, and these things they come up with, it isn't, it's not right. The whole system is not right. It's corrupted. And something needs to be done about it, man. And if I could do something about it, unfortunately I have a criminal record and I have all this shit in my past or whatever, So no one's gonna listen to me because I have an opinion about this stuff. But I prevailed. I got the custody of my sons. I got all of the custody of my boys that I wanted and I eventually received. The only problem is, it cost me about $350,000 fucking dollars, man. With the attorneys and with, you know, because it's an attorney, it's an attorney's agenda. They get these people battling with each other and they stir the shit up. And then you get involved with the court and they throw everybody into therapy and it turns into this fucking cycle of a circus. And what happens, man? You know, somebody like me, I become the sacrificial lamb. I become the cash cow, you know? I keep pumping out the money. They keep putting us in the programs. Eventually, like I said, I prevailed. But fuck, man, I went through 3 years of that shit just to be able to be in my home with my own flesh and blood. Nobody should be able to do that to people. They shouldn't be able to make those kind of determinations in a situation like that. It's not fair, man. And you know, you realize what I could have done with that money if I would have taken that same amount of money and put it in a trust fund somewhere for those little buggers to grow up with and have to look forward to when they needed money later on in their life. God, man, you know? What if I broke my fucking leg or something and I couldn't go make a movie? Think about all that dough that would be in the bank for those little guys somewhere, you know? Instead of pumping it out to all these lawyers.
Yeah.
You know, it's anyway, whatever. I don't mean to go off on this. But I'm telling you, if you're going to do anything about this interview and all these movies and everything we're talking about, that's all cool. But promise me that you put something in there. I'm saying that this system that a man has to go through in order to establish the fact that he is a good father or a good person, in order to just be with his kids, is fucked up and it's corrupted, man, and it's wrong, you know?
That was good. That was good, man.
I'm sorry, man.
We're obviously close to Harvey and Sir Dennis.
Yeah, very much
have they, getting to know them and being real tight with them, have they taught you, well, have you learned from them the mix of keeping a quality of life and work?
Dennis went through similar things as I did with the kid.
Harvey too.
Yeah, exactly. They both went through similar stuff.
Lawrence Tierney.
And the three of us have had these conversations many times. They went through the same shit that I went through. And so I sympathize with them and they understand my thing. And they will say the same thing I said to you, bro. It's the same thing. You know, we learn from each other. You know, in fact, Dennis and I had the same therapist appointed to look after our children from the court system.
Really?
Yeah, we had the same one, and we both had similar feelings about that particular situation. And we all learn from each other, man. Sure. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about money, you know, making it. And, I mean, I guess that's why if you're going to get paid, you may as well do Batman or 007, right?
I think I'd make a good Batman.
They're doing several Batmans. One of them is like an older Batman.
I'd be a great Batman. They wouldn't think of me for Batman, but you know, that's something wrong with that too. But
no, that'd be cool though. You should campaign for it.
I'd be a great Batman, you know.
And when you make the dough for your loved ones and yourself, what do you like to spend your money on?
Well, the first thing I do is I take care of their schooling. You know, I make sure that they're all set up as far as school goes and everything they need for their environment and that kind of thing, and the place we live. You know, I spend a lot of money on houses. You know, like the one we're sitting in right now, and you know, I think it's good to have an environment. You know, I spend a lot of dough on environment. I'm very environmentally, you know, coordinated, but I've blown a lot of money on cars and motorcycles. And
so that's some of the fun stuff that's good to do.
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah, that's fun stuff.
The rewards.
That's just toys. That's all bullshit. And eventually you have a bunch of flat tires and dead batteries. And so
when you had to meet the wise guys and Donnie Brasco, you're a tough guy, but were you ever afraid that you might get whacked if you stepped out of line on him?
You know, the thing of that is that I really wanted to meet those guys. I mean, I thought that was going to be so cool to be able to actually meet these guys that really did this thing and be hanging out with them. You know, I was amazed I was flattered that I figured, what the fuck did they want to have to do with actors, you know?
Were they the New York variety or the New Jersey variety?
Both. And they were very helpful. They're very gracious, and they were very good to me. They, one of the first times we went out together, we went to one of the lounges, you know, like a motion lounge, like the motion lounge of the movie, a storefront. And when we went in, have you ever seen those big rubber rats that they make for Halloween? Ones that move with a little motor in it?
Yeah.
It's like a rat caught in a giant mousetrap, and it's going like this, it's all bloody. They had one hanging from the wall when me and Johnny walked in. And they went, look, it's Donnie Brasco. They were trying to fuck with Johnny because he was playing a rat. And I think that's the whole problem with the movie, is that basically Donnie Brasco's a rat, you know? And I think that after he hung out with the guys for a long time, he became very enamored of them and didn't want to rat everybody out. It became a problem for him because he became close to everybody. In reality, it was Sonny and Donnie that were close. It was not Lefty and Donnie. They made Lefty and Donnie do that for the movie because Al Pacino was Lefty for the screenplay. But the true story is that it was Sonny and Donnie.
Oh, really?
Sonny brought Donnie in, and they were the ones who were close.
Lefty was like just kind of this loser.
The real Lefty died of a heart attack in prison, and Sonny Black was found floating in the fucking Hudson River with his hands chopped off. So I enjoyed meeting those guys, and they were really cool to us, and it was very interesting hanging out with them. And I actually went to the cemetery, and I actually visited the grave of Dominic, of Sonny Black, and I met people who knew him, and I tried to give some justice to his memory. And those guys are a lot of fun to hang out with, and they were very cool, and they never overdid it. It wasn't like they were hanging around to the point where you're going, oh shit, you know, God, leave me alone. They came around, they did their thing, they were open to being approached and talked about stuff. But then, when you got to get busy or whatever, they went on about their way. They, you know, they never intruded on people's time space.
Was it mainly just hanging out with them? Did you have questions for them?
I asked them a lot of stuff, man. Most of my questions were just general stuff, like day-to-day living kind of questions, and you know, just I pick up things from them personality-wise. I picked up unintentional like gestures and nuances and personality stuff I picked up from them that I found fascinating.
And the way their
the way they interact. Yeah, the camaraderie. That's been a theme of our interview. Yeah. And I definitely picked up on camaraderie stuff from them. And I was very much enamored of the way that they have a certain kind of code of behavior. There's certain things are understood and certain things are kind of...
And when it's business, it's business.
Yeah.
They put their foot down.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing, I think, is the business aspect of things and the understanding of certain things. And, you know, there were scenes that we had to do that just having them around created a certain atmosphere sometimes that was very conducive to the shooting of scenes. You know, because if you're sitting there and you're playing one of these fellas and you know that the real deal is, you know, across the set watching you know, you're going to pay a little bit more attention.
Don't you think like Sopranos is pretty good though? I mean, having met those guys?
I like the Sopranos, you know, I mean,
Gandolfini's fucking great.
I would ordinarily say that something like that would be stupid, but I really like the Sopranos, man. I think that guy does a pretty good job. And, you know, we had this conversation earlier. I don't know why the fuck they haven't put me on the show. I don't know about that, you know, the psychiatrist part of the show. I know that's
good in the first season, but...
Yeah, and I know it's very interesting to some people, but I don't know. It's that part of the show is kind of false.
It's interesting because he's got all these problems to deal with every day, you know, family and girlfriend, and he's got to be good to his friends.
Yeah.
And then business is business.
No, listen, I like the way Gandolfini plays the part, and...
You'll be the guy that could stand up to him, though, as a guy coming from New York.
You know, I think I could do something really good for them. I think I could make a really interesting...
Because the New York side of it hasn't really stepped in except for that one boss yet.
I think I could make something really interesting for them. I really do.
You got pretty tight with Al and Johnny in that movie too, right?
Well, more so Al. You know, Johnny's kind of a private guy. You know, Johnny's kind of quiet, and he's much younger than me. And Johnny and I didn't really get on that well. I love Johnny. I respect Johnny, but he's kind of off into his own Johnny thing.
Yeah,
and no one knows what that is, and whatever that is. You know, he's very protective of whatever that is. He doesn't let too many people get into that. So, but Al was We had a little problem at the Viper Club too. After the movie came out, I busted up the bathroom a little bit. I got into a hassle with somebody in the bathroom, and Johnny misunderstood the whole thing and thought that I was, trying to wreck his club, and it really wasn't like that at all, man. But
Is it all clear now? Or?
as far as I know, it is. I mean, I don't know, because I haven't talked to him
Depends on the
since
story
then,
he
so.
believes, right?
Exactly. Listen, there's my truth, his truth, and the God's honest truth. So, who knows? I got along much better with Al. Al was very cool, very generous actor.
Yeah, you hung with him quite a bit.
Al was a very generous guy who really wanted to make sure the characters worked. In fact, there's a scene in the movie where Sonny is trying to collect money from a guy, and the guy gives him the money, and they're going to leave, and Sonny turns around and shoots the guy. And that was Al's idea to do that scene, because he wanted, it was very important for Al to establish the fact that everyone thinks Sonny is nuts, and they have to fear Sonny. And he thought that there should be some scenes where you understand why they fear Sonny. And there was even a day when I did a scene with Al that he wasn't on the set, because he was doing a play at the time, and he would roll in at about 10:30 in the morning in his corduroy jacket, shooting since 6 a.m. And there was a scene that we did in the Motion Lounge where a question that I asked him, and we have an exchange, and they shot my whole side of it because he wasn't there. And when he found out that we did that without him, he asked the director if they would reshoot it with him in the room. And he sat off camera from me and just gave me the looks, just the eye contact off screen.
That's generous.
It was. And
From Al Pacino, too.
Exactly.
Fucking Al.
Exactly, man, exactly.
He's number one and number two.
Exactly. I said, how come he gets to come in at 10:30? And they said, well, because he's Al. I said, okay, that made sense. Anyway, years later, in fact, last year, I was in Vancouver. I was making a comedy, a film called The Guest, that's supposed to come out in October sometime. And I had about 5 days off. Al was in Canada shooting the movie Insomnia. He was in the same hotel that I was in. So I called him, I left him a message. I said, Al, it's Michael, I'm here. I got about 5 days off, I'd really like to get the hell out of here. He calls me up and says, I got a jet. I got a private jet. You got a fucking jet? Yeah, I got a jet. I'm going back and forth to Los Angeles on a jet. I got a fucking jet. And I said, holy shit, really? And he goes, yeah, you want to ride? You want to ride on a jet? I go, yeah, man. He let me hitch a fucking ride on his Learjet from Canada to Los Angeles and back to Canada a couple days later.
Wow.
That was a super generous thing to do. That was a very, very generous thing to do. A very gracious, generous thing for him to do. A little 8-seater Learjet. And Al took me, God bless him, I got to go home and see my boys.
Yeah, that's great.
And I would have had to rot my fucking guts out in Canada.
And did you know Brad Pitt much in Thelma and Louise?
I smoked a lot of pot with Brad Pitt while we were shooting Thelma and Louise. We used to get stoned in the morning. We'd stand in front of the motel and waiting for the driver to pick us up. And we never really spoke to each other very much. Like I say, we got stoned and we went to work and that was it.
You knew him before he was Brad Pitt.
That's right. Exactly. I sure did, man. I sure did.
We brought up Harvey and Dennis before, but who are your best friends?
My best friends?
Yeah.
Well...
Or who's your best friend?
It's hard to say, man. It's really hard to say. And if I started naming them, there would be somebody out there who would be feeling like I didn't remember them. So I'd rather not say. All I'm going to say is good friends are very hard to come by. And, they come and they go. And most of the guys that I had close relationships with are gone. And, obviously Harvey and Dennis, that goes without saying. And Elias Koteas was, he was, Elias,
Yeah,
don't you?
yeah. My brother worked with him.
Elias and I were very, very, very close. And Tom Sizemore is a good friend of mine. And Christopher Walken. And Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah.
Harry Dean is a wonderful, beautiful man and who's been a great mentor to me. There's a screenwriter that I'm very good friends with named Dayton Kelly. And, but like I say, I'm sure that somebody out there who probably thinks that I should have mentioned them and I'm not, so.
I know you love Peckinpah. Who are your influences? Be it director or actors, or I know we talked about the old school thing.
Sam Fuller and John Huston. John Huston did a picture with Robert Mitchum called Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, which I think is the greatest Mitchum film ever made and one of John's better efforts. My sister was briefly married to John's son.
Danny Wilson?
Danny, yeah, who turned out to be kind of a punk. You know, he's just turned out to be a big jerk. And, which I could care less if you mention. I mean, that's fine. He needs to be choked out by somebody. He's lucky I didn't do it when he was married to my sister. In fact, I did in the Kate Manalini's restaurant on Wilshire Boulevard. But anyway, it was one of those half playful chokes, like a half playful and half real, just to get the message across.
Right.
But I like Billy Wilder and George Stevens.
Yeah.
Shane, man.
Oh yeah?
Shane.
What about like Giant and stuff like that?
That was George Stevens. You know? All the George Stevens films, I mean, holy shit, you know. Those guys, come on, man, you know, I think I'm stuck in the past.
So you really like those guys better than like Scorsese or...
Well, I wish Scorsese would give me a fucking call, you know? I mean, if you pick up the phone and give me a job one of these days, I think we could probably do a really interesting film together. But I haven't heard from Marty, so what am I gonna do?
Musically, are you very musically influenced?
I love...
You talked about how you want to play Hank Williams.
I like jazz. Yeah. I'm very much into jazz. I like KLON, which is now KKJZ, and Dexter Gordon, and Lee Morgan, and Chet Baker, and Dizzy
Dexter
Gillespie.
Gordon, wasn't he nominated for an Oscar?
He was, yeah.
For that movie?
And Louis Armstrong, and you know, Miles Davis. And of course, you know, I was a huge Frank Sinatra. I listened to Frank a lot, and Jimi Hendrix, and Hank Williams. I want to make a film about Hank Williams, but the more time that goes by, I'm getting too old to play Hank Williams. You know, he was very young when he died, and if I can't make that picture in the next 5 years, I'm gonna be too fucking old to play Hank Williams, you know. But
you're primed for Elvis, I'm telling you.
I'd like to play Elvis, I really would, but I just haven't been given the right screenplay. I haven't been given the right material for Elvis. I once was given a script called Elvis, which was about a guy who was a psychopathic killer by day, and at night he was an Elvis impersonator. And later on in the story you find out that he's the illegitimate son of Elvis Presley.
Sounds interesting.
Unfortunately, the screenplay wasn't as interesting as I'm making it sound. It was kind of a bad thing, but you know, I think in the end, I think if I ever do play Elvis, it'll probably have to be something like that. It'll probably have to be some weird offshoot of him, because you know.
Unless they do the definitive Last Days of Elvis, you know.
Well, Kurt Russell did a pretty good job, but yeah, you know, I think the Last Days might be an interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, if you put on weight and everything,
I could bring. I mean, I think I could. You know, he had that fucking. You know, I get it. You know, I get the physicality of those.
You do.
Backwards thing, and you know, the hands thing. And you know, I get it. I get the, you know, the whole, you know, thing of him. I mean, I get it. But I couldn't. I would always feel bizarre about doing it unless it was really the right situation.
Unless it's the ultimate version.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I'd like to. I don't know.
There's some stories of his behavior, you know, and it...
Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your memory sway to a bright sunny day when I kissed you and called you sweetheart? Do the chairs in your parlor seem empty and bare? Do you gaze at your doorway and picture me there? Is your heart filled with pain? Shall I come back again? Tell me, dear, are you lonesome tonight?
Good, man, beautiful. That was Sir Michael Madsen, Elvis 68 comeback special there. That was great, man. What about growing up? Did your father have an influence in you? I know they got divorced.
My dad, that's my dad right over there in that little picture with the Great Dane. My dad was a Chicago fireman, and his brother was killed in the war, and he enlisted in the Navy. And he was a great man, a great hero. Parents split up, you know, so that's, you know, whatever. They did their thing, but yeah, he was a good. He's 75 years old now, my dad. He's still around, you know.
Where is he?
He's in Chicago.
Oh.
He's in Chicago.
You want to light one of those?
Yeah, you got one of those paper deals?
Cut it. We talk a little bit about the filmmakers. I know you like David Lynch or Gus Van Sant.
I do very much, but those fucking guys like the other ones, they never call me, man.
I think Coen Brothers too.
Listen, man, I'm here to say, I would love to do a picture with the Coen brothers. I'd love to do a picture with Gus Van Sant. I'd love to do a picture with David Lynch. I think these guys are missing the boat. I don't know why they don't call me. It's a fucking mystery to me, man. It makes me crazy when I think about it. Best years of my life and the best years of my career are going by me, and I haven't been able to work with some of these guys, man.
Even Abel Ferrara too.
Well, I have visited Abel Ferrara in his cave in New York, and him and I have had our subhuman connection to each other. We were almost going to do a Western called Comanche Moon, but for one reason or another it didn't happen. And I also heard that he was going to do a sequel to The King of New York. And I think that maybe somewhere down the line I'm going to do something with Abel, and I don't know why it hasn't happened now up to now, but it hasn't. So
I interviewed him. It was like 4:30 in the morning in New York. We had to do it 3 times because he's walking around in the streets.
he's quite a character.
Yeah.
Abel is on planet Abel. Abel's on planet Abel, and no one is permitted on that planet. If you don't have the right rocket ship, you're not allowed on planet Abel.
Mr. Pink would have been a nice stretch, but how about like playing a real goofball in like Farrelly Brothers or something?
Well, I just did that in a film called The Guest. I played a very bumbling drug addict, a drug dealer, and it's, I think, listen, if it's half as funny as it was while we were doing it, I think it will make a huge impression on. I mean, I don't think that I would ever be perceived as being comedic, depending upon how you look at it, because I think that some of my stuff is comedic. I think The Guest is going to be a huge departure for me, and I think it'll probably, I just wish it would come out. I think people really dig it. I think people really enjoy it. I'm happy with what I did in that movie. I think it's very funny.
And we talked about maybe a sports picture, a single father or something like that.
Yeah, I would have liked to have been in on Any Sunday, but of course, that goes back to the Oliver Stone conversation. Why in the fuck didn't he call me for that? I could have done the Dennis Quaid part. Everybody's All-American was a great picture. Dennis Quaid did, football player.
Yeah.
I could have done something like that. I wasn't a great athlete, but I think I could portray one. I think there's a big difference there, I think I could do something with that. But,
How about Scorsese's Dino?
You mean the Dean Martin thing?
Yeah, he wants to do it with Tom Hanks, but...
Listen, they asked me to play Dean Martin in the Rat Pack. And instead I went to Philadelphia to do a favor to Chris Penn, to play a movie for him that some of his friends were producing. And Joe Mantegna ended up playing Dean. And my agent at the time persuaded me not to do it because she said the material wasn't very good. I think, looking back on it now, I realize she had her own reasons for dissuading me from doing that. But I think that if anybody plays Dean Martin in the future, I think they should probably give me a shot at it. Mm-hmm. I think that, listen, Frank wanted to be Dean. The saying goes that Sammy wanted to be Frank wanted to be Dean, and Dean just wanted to go home and lay down on the couch. And I can relate to that. I think it's very funny, and I wished I could have played Dean Martin, and I probably should have. But the way it was portrayed to me is everyone said Ray Liotta could never play Frank Sinatra, and the whole thing was going to be a fiasco.
When you did Carnal Knowledge on Steppenwolf, Sergio Leone saw that, right?
No, he saw a videotape that Harisse Davidson made for me. There was an agent in Chicago named Harisse Davidson, who was my sister's agent. And she made a videotape of me sitting at a table talking about a fight that I got into in a diner. And she sent that tape to Sis Corman. And Sis Corman was the casting director for Sergio Leone. And Sergio Leone bought me a plane ticket. And he flew me out to New York and put me up at the Mayflower Hotel. And then the second day that I was there, he took me out of the Mayflower and brought me over to his brownstone. And I stayed up on the top floor of the brownstone, right next door to Katharine Hepburn. And we used to look out the window in the morning and watch Katharine Hepburn in her garden, picking up sticks, cleaning out her little garden. And Sergio was Italian. He didn't speak very much English. He had an interpreter with him. So everything that I said went through the interpreter and came back to me. And just recently, when I was in Spain, shooting Blueberry, we shot in Almeria. And Almeria is where they did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I did Blueberry on the same sets that were originally built for Sergio Leone to do The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Which to me is like pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty fucking cool. They also did The Magnificent Seven there, which is, it doesn't get much better than that.
Right.
I love Blueberry. I think it's going to be a good movie.
Vincent Cassel, right?
Yeah.
He's a good fucking actor, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yes, he is. Him and Juliette Lewis, Ernest Borgnine, Jeffrey Lewis, Juliette's father is in it, and And the guy from Once Were Warriors is in it.
Oh, Tamara Morrison.
Tamara Morrison's in it, and he's wonderful, by the way. And he's a good cat too.
And you're the lead in that?
I'm the antagonist. The story is about Mike Blueberry,
Played by Cassell?
and played by Cassell, and Wally Blount. who's
Frenchman.
played by me.
Playing him.
The Frenchman, yeah. With a French director, and with a Japanese cinematographer, with a French and Spanish crew, and American actors. I mean, holy shit, man. Can you get any wider than that? I mean, oh my God, man.
You got interested watching the Steppenwolfs of Mice and Men with Malkovich in it.
Right?
Is it true that you were going to go because you were going to meet girls there?
I knew this kid that I was going to. I was studying to be an E. I wanted to be an ambulance attendant.
Right.
And I knew this kid that was in ambulance school with me, and he was an actor, and he was going over there. He was going to a casting cattle call thing. And, you know, he said, "You want to come with me?" And I said, "Yeah, but why?" And he goes, "Oh, man, there's a lot of good-looking broads there." So, that's true.
And you did a little acting in New York once you started getting into acting?
I went to the actor studio, but when I went to the actor studio, there was nobody there, okay? It was in the afternoon, and the place was deserted. And I actually went through the gates, and I walked through the lobby and into the theater of the actor studio. And I sat in the chairs, and I walked around up on the stage, and I went up in the balcony, and I felt the vibe of that whole place. I think there's actually some pictures of me somewhere when I was sitting around in there. And I very much wanted to be a part of that whole thing, but I'm very impatient, man, and I'm a person who always lives 5 or 6 days ahead of myself. And I just wanted to get on with it. And I hated the idea of studying acting. I wanted to do the acting. I wanted to make the thing. I didn't want to study. I wanted to get on with it. And so no, I never did anything in New York other than that.
So you moved
I
to
went
LA?
to New York and I lived in New York for a little bit.
What kind of jobs were you doing
At
there?
the Mayflower. I just worked at a car wash.
Oh, yeah?
And then I went back to Chicago and then to Los Angeles. I got a small part in a film called War Games.
Oh, yeah.
And War Games is what brought me to LA. And then I got a job at the Union 76 station in Beverly Hills. And I pumped gas there and worked there.
So for Warren Beatty and people.
Warren Beatty, yeah. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire was the very first customer that I ever had that came in.
Wow.
And it was a couple days before Christmas, and he gave me a $100 bill. He drove in the station in a Mercedes with a flat tire, and he gave me a $100 bill to fix the flat tire. Everybody came in there, man. Peter Falk and Don Knotts and Jack Lemmon. Warren came in very late one night, which I asked him if he remembered when I saw him at that dinner party about Kill Bill, and he said that he did remember, but I'm not sure whether he did or not. And Cicely Tyson, I remember, came in there, and just about everybody that I'd ever had watched growing up came in there for gas. So I realized I was probably in the right place. I was probably in a good position.
You talked a little bit about the acting and studying acting, all that stuff. When I talked to Harvey or Dennis or even John Boyd, you know, we talked a little shop with them, you know what I mean? But do you think all that method stuff for you is like hogwash? Are you one of these guys, like, if it works for you, fine, but for me, that's...
I think that if I had a little bit of money in the bank, and I knew that my kids were looked after, and I had the luxury of going to study at a place like the acting studio, that I would like to do that. But for me, it didn't really work out that way for me. I think that it's been good for some folks and not for others. I mean, even Brando himself says that whole thing was a bunch of bullshit. I studied with Stella Adler for a while, which I've never told anybody before now. But I did spend a week with Stella Adler, and she got very annoyed with me. And she was a very colorful woman, but I also think she was very emotionally disturbed. And
As many acting teachers are.
I'm sure that probably had a lot to do with her talent, but her and I didn't really get on with each other, and it turned out to be a negative experience.
There have been some stories about your unorthodox behavior on the set, like when you flashed Alec Baldwin in The Getaway. Did you get the desired...
Well, I was carrying on a relationship at that time with Jennifer Tilly, and we were actually... we were fucking each other like bunny rabbits, okay? And I was getting ready to do a scene with Alec, and I had given him a lot of grief about the fact that he was doing a remake of a Steve McQueen film. And there's a great reaction that Steve McQueen has in El Paso when he sees Al Lettieri with Fran, and he realizes that Al Lettieri is not dead. And I have been joking with Alec all through the production about that particular reaction, and asking him if he thought that he could do that as good as Steve did. And on the day that we were shooting that scene, Alec was outside of a window getting ready to do his shot. And I was a little concerned about, he was about to do the shot, his single, of him looking down the hall and seeing Rudy standing at the door. I wanted to help him with that moment. I whipped out my pecker. He was standing behind the door, and I unzipped my pants, and he I had been with Jennifer about a short time before that, so I was in a state of semi-arousal, and so I would imagine when I unleashed that item, it was pretty shocking to poor Alec, and he reacted the way that I hoped that he would, with humor and anxiety and oh my God in heaven, oh my God, what did Michael Madsen just do? But then he had to do the shot, man. So if you watch the movie and you see that particular scene is in the hotel in El Paso, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did it.
You didn't get pissed on him, did you?
No, not at all.
That's actually, you're helping him out a lot.
I was just trying to help a fellow actor.
Yeah.
I was if you want to talk about the actor studio or about method acting, God in heaven, there it is right there.
Yeah, right. Generous actor. You practiced on the set? I watched that thing about the Reservoir Dogs trunk.
Not to the detriment of production, but sure. I mean, I think I have as good of a sense of humor as anybody.
Are you behaving
I like to
recently?
have fun, and I don't want to. I like to have fun, and I think sometimes things get a little too serious. And like I said, I'm not gonna hold up production, and I'm not gonna hurt anyone. But I think that sometimes there's a need for a little bit of frivolity once in a while, you know, as long as it's taken in the right way.
If you listen to your CD, you're going to be reading
I think I'm an observer of the human condition, and I think that I've been compelled to write about it, and I've been influenced by Lauren Isley and Ernest Hemingway, and I think that I've been, I started to write for some unknown reason. I can't tell you that I started out to write because I wanted to write a book, but the book has happened accidentally. It's the third one I just finished. So every time I finish a book, I say, that's it. I'm never going to write another book. This has all been a big accident. And then suddenly I find myself writing again. So I don't know.
a lot of people that like your work too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been a pretty good response to it.
I would imagine that it must take more courage to write what you know and how you know it than perhaps tackling some of the acting roles.
I think I'm more proud of my books than I am of any film that I've ever done. Right?
Really? That's saying a lot.
Yeah, well, it's a little more personal. Just kind of turned out that way. It's amazingly, sometimes when I write stuff, I think it's really lousy. And then when I go back and I read it later, I go, shit, man, that's pretty good, you know? And if nobody ever reacted to it, I'm just fine. But a lot of people have. It's funny how certain poems, get pointed out by different people. Some of the obscure ones, everyone seems to have one that they'll bring up. They'll say, hey, I read so and so, and it'll be one that I never heard anybody else mention. And it's kind of a nice feeling, you know.
You had a reputation as a sort of a wild man back in the days, living from hotel to hotel, that kind of stuff. What mellowed you, you think?
Well, I don't know that I'm mellowed. I mean, I think I still have the propensity to live in hotel to hotel, but I think that I think that I think people kind of have the perception that if you have your own opinion about something that you're rebellious, and I don't really think it's that at all. I just think I have an opinion. An actor with an opinion is a dangerous thing. People are very fearful of an actor with an opinion. And, I suppose that they would be more comfortable if we were all just a bunch of robotic puppets that they could control into, performing for everyone. But I think that a lot of my exploits have been over amplified, and a lot of things that I've done, no one knows anything about. So I think that, it all depends upon the way you look at it. I mean, I think that I've been an optimistic person, and I think sometimes optimism leads to fanaticism, or the perception of fanaticism.
Was there any one particular thing that was a downfall to you at some point? Like for Dennis, he had a period of alcoholism. Well, everyone thinks, he was into drugs or something, but he said, no, I smoked weed, but I was really too heavy into alcohol.
Oh, I mean,
When he quit, he had that big comeback with Blue Velvet.
I think for me is that I've done just about everything that there is to do, but I never got hooked on anything. I never needed something, And I think that's the difference. I mean, I think that I never became a slave to any substance, and I think that I've enjoyed, all that, kind of lifestyle, along with all the people that were there with me. But I didn't become dysfunctional. I never got sloppy. I wasn't the type of person to throw up all over themselves, or to suddenly, get into some frenetic kind of a coke for, oh God, I gotta have it. It wasn't like that. I never was like that with me. So I think that I was always able to function, and I was always able to see the end of the road. So I didn't. I was able to back off from things before it adversely affected me.
Your parents are divorced, and you've been divorced before. Do you believe in marriage and family values?
Wow, that's a hard question. I think I believe in the idea of it, and I think I believe that it's possible, and I've tried to make an example of myself as far as a parent is concerned in the raising of my children, but love and togetherness and happiness is another question, and I wish that it was a singular question, but it's more of a question that has to be answered by two people, because you can have all these grandiose ideas of what's possible, but if you're not together with someone who believes in your same philosophy or your idea of things, then the whole goddamn thing is just going to explode, and it's not going to work.
Seems like you're in a happy situation now, though, as far as
I am right now. That's true. I am right now. I think that I'm very deeply in love with my wife, and she happens to be somebody who doesn't break my balls, and she's not preoccupied with Hollywood, and in fact, right now she's in Africa. She's riding around on horses in Africa, and, which leaves me to have some time alone with my boys, and it's a blessing, man, It's nice not to have the anxiety of trying to search for a significant other, but I'm not foolish enough to think that I'm living in utopia, because I think one has to nourish these things. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Touched on this before, the whole camaraderie between men. You really love your boys, don't you? You love being a father.
I think that's an understatement to the least. I wouldn't want to categorize my feelings for my boys or being a father. I mean, I think that it's something that goes way beyond the question in an interview, and I think it turns into something a lot more, it's God's greatest blessing.
Right.
I mean, if someone would have told me 20 years ago that I was going to have 4 sons, I would have laughed and said, yeah, sure, and my name is Rita. But here it is, and I got these little buggers, and I saw an old picture in a magazine of Kirk Douglas. It's an old black and white picture of Kirk Douglas with his sons. His son's throwing him in a swimming pool, and all this stuff that I'm doing, and no matter what I'm doing, I get more of a kick out of my little boys and the funny things that they say than I ever have it writing books or making movies. even the things that they say sometimes are just so hysterical, you know. You can't replace those kind of memories, you know.
Well, how would you feel if your kids wanted to get in the show business?
I would prefer that they not. I wish they would do anything but that.
Right.
I wish they would become doctors or lawyers or baseball players, or my oldest boy wants to be a professional football player, and I would encourage them to do anything but going into what I'm doing. What I'm doing has too much anxiety and wrapped up in it. It's too much of a wild card. It's feast or famine. And that's not a good way to be.
But they see their dad as successful, and wouldn't they be drawn to that side of it?
I think inevitably they will be. And I don't think I can stop it from happening. I think they're naturally going to be drawn to do that. They're going to want to do that because that's what they see me do. They're going to want to do the same thing. I'm going to try to stop them, but at the same time, I'm not going to, I'm not going to hit them with their head. If that's what they want to do, so be it. But they're going to have to make their own way with it, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, they can probably get through the door, they can probably get the meeting, but not necessarily going to get the job unless they can deliver the goods.
Right.
And I can't, that's something that I can't make happen. They're going to have to do that on their own.
How do you feel about the tough guy or cool guy label?
Well, I guess I'd rather have that than to be Neil Sedaka. I mean,
and then again, there's not much you can do about it too.
Yeah, what am I going to do? I mean, no matter what, even if I played Neil Sedaka in a movie, they would still say that about me.
Tough man version of Neil Sedaka.
Yeah, they would say, the depiction of Neil Sedaka.
What makes a man tough, you think? Again, it'll probably go back to your influences when men were men.
Adversity, life's adversities eventually will shape a man's personality. But some of it I think is genetic.
You did television last year. I mean, I'd imagine mainly so they could stay with the kids a little bit more and stuff.
Are you referring to The Big Apple?
Was that shot here or?
That was in New York.
Oh, okay.
I did The Big Apple because David Milch wrote that role for me of that character, Terry Maddox, in The Big Apple. And David Milch is a genius. He's a great writer. He's a wonderful man. He was a good friend to me. He's a genuine person, and he's one of those guys that I've run across in my life who is ingenuous, and I think that I would actually have to say that I love David Milch. As much as one man can love another man without being queer.
You've worked with him before?
No, I never did. But he wrote that role for me, and I wanted to do that show because he wrote that role for me. I got to live in New York City. Unfortunately, they didn't have too much for me. They didn't have enough for me to do. I only had to work about 3 days for each episode, which was really a bummer. They didn't leave the show on the air long enough to have it mean anything or go anywhere for anybody. But I think the episodes stand up for themselves, and I think that they do very well. Mm-hmm. I don't like television. I sure as hell don't like television series.
So you wouldn't consider going back to television?
No, never.
Unless it was Sopranos.
That's not television, that's HBO.
Yeah. Okay, finally, could you talk a little bit about the film that you're going to be producing?
I'm making a film called Red Light Runners, and I'm trying to raise the money out of the UK, and the only reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to control my own destiny. Tired of having other people run my life, and we got a lot of really good actors involved.
Who are some of the people that are already attached?
We have Martin Kemp from the Craze.
Right.
Remember the Craze?
Right.
That fucking guy is cool. Man.
Yeah.
And the Craze was a good picture.
Great movie.
And we have Eddie Izzard, however you pronounce it. He was in Blueberry with me, and Chris Penn. There's an epilogue and a prologue in the picture, hoping to get Harvey and Dennis Hopper for it. Dennis has already read it. I've sent it to Harvey. They both already kind of, they're looking at it, so we're negotiating. It's if I can pull this off, I think that I will have probably put myself in a position where, gonna be making my own films.
Developing your own
instead of waiting
stuff.
for someone else to bring me a job. That appeals to me greatly.
You play a good guy in this?
Well, he's probably perceived as not being a good guy, but in fact He's not written as a good guy, but I'm going to play him as a good guy. I'm going to play a bad guy as a good guy.
Anti-hero.
Yeah. You remember Paul Newman in Bull Hand Luke?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like that.
Vinnie Jones in it too, right?
Vinnie Jones, yeah. Vinnie Jones, graciously. Vinnie Jones is. he's a good character, man. He's a cool cat. He was
some player too, you know.
Yeah. Vinnie Jones has been very, very good for me, and.
Yeah, he's great. He's another, you know, like yourself. He's an authentic character, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's come a long way with a lot of things that he's done. I'm glad to have him in the picture. I'm very glad to be with Vinnie, and I'm happy that he decided to be in this thing with us. And I'm gonna rock with Vinnie Jones, man. He's a good cat. He's a very cool guy. I'm glad to have him in the project.
All right, that should just about do it. Anything else you want to say?
Do you want a steak?
Oh, I love one. Yeah.
That's my final steak.